Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the African American Museum in Philadelphia for our final workshop in the virtual Black History Month workshop series, Hip-Hop Jazz Musicology. My name is LaRonda Richardson. I am the Visitor Services Manager at the museum, and I would like to welcome you. Audience participation is encouraged. Please be sure to mute your mics during the presentation. You may also utilize the chat to ask questions, but please wait to be acknowledged before speaking. We will now have a few words from our Vice President of Programming, Ivan Henderson.
Hello, I'm Ivan Henderson, Vice President of Programming at the African American Museum in Philadelphia, which many of us call AAMP or AMP. Thank you for joining us for this virtual learning experience. Everyone here at AMP has been hard at work developing a variety of virtual workshops, tours, and fun activities that you can access online from anywhere. So be sure to visit us at www.aampmuseum.org or connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram to learn more. And now, I invite you to sit up and tune in. At AMP, we believe that exploring our history and culture together gives us the tools to build a better today and to design an even better tomorrow. Again, thanks for joining us. We are so glad to meet you.
As Ivan mentioned, we have an exciting program for you today. Hip-Hop Jazz Musicology teaches participants about the social, historical, and musical influences on hip-hop music and how it relates to other genres within African American traditions. Hip-Hop Jazz Musicology creates a forum to bridge our collective understanding of how hip-hop relates to its predecessors. Your participation contributes to the workshop, and we hope you are able to walk away with an enjoying experience, deeper connection to the story, music, history that is the African American experience. Text Rich Ali is also known as Ali, is a multi-instrumentalist artist and teacher. Born and raised in Newark, New Jersey, Ali has been a Philadelphia resident since 2002, working independently as well as with the museum to teach and share his musical talents with children of all ages and academic levels. During his time as the co-founder and lead facilitator of the CODA program, Ali developed the Hip-Hop Jazz Musicology workshop, which he will be sharing with you this afternoon. I now present to you Text Rich Ali.
everyone. Welcome to our workshop, Hip-Hop Jazz Musicology. So we're going to bring it in with a little chant. It goes Hip-Hop Jazz Musicology, 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 Hip-Hop Jazz Musicology. 1, 2, here we go. First I'll let the rhythm hit 'em and fit 'em in and get rid 'em and spit 'em. I'll reach the teeth with maximum wisdom, cut through the bling bling, nuclear venom. Live hip-hop tracks and jazz flows are minimum. Just to keep you thinking is my actual mission. See, peace is my natural vision. To my family, I love you and I'm glad you can listen. Glad you can listen, be free and a part of hip-hop jazz musicology. Hip-hop jazz musicology, hip-hop jazz musicology, hip-hop jazz musicology, hip-hop jazz. Here we go now. Thing. If it ain't got that swing, I said it don't mean a thing. All you got to do is sing. Said it makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm everything you got. Said it don't mean a thing. All you got to do is sing. Little swing. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. Go home to my Lord and be free. They'll be singing. They'll be singing. They'll be singing over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more mourning, no more mourning, no more mourning over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And go home to my Lord and be free. Well, thank you all so much for being here today and listening to the opening selections. I hope you were caught the hint to sing along where you recognize certain pieces. But I'm really glad to be here today with you all doing our workshop, Hip-Hop Jazz Musicology. So I want to get the workshop started just to open up a little discussion. So when we talk about what is hip-hop jazz musicology, hip-hop jazz musicology is a way for us to bridge and understand some of the connections that different moments in history and music that was happening during those historical moments, how they led the way, paved the way, and kind of got us to where we are today in terms of music, in terms of hip-hop, and in terms of many of the different types of popular music that we listen to. So that being said, we're going to cover a number of musical genres and key historical moments and how they all connect and come together in this particular story. So I'd like to, I don't know, I want to kind of get a feel for who's out there, but I'd just like to check in to ask, like, what are some of the different types of music that you all enjoy listening to? So, Afro beats, yes. Reggae music, R&B, rhythm and blues, yes. Salsa, okay, amazing. All right, so what's pretty interesting about this particular list so far is all of these particular musics are easily connected and traceable to Africa. Other types of music might be blues, gospel music, rock and roll. So just to give you some examples, but even these types of music we'll talk about in a minute are connected to also influence from music coming out of Africa. So in terms of looking at hip hop, one of the first things I always really want to start with, what is it about hip hop that draws us into it? Why do we like listening to hip hop music? So just curious, what are some of your responses to that? Well, I hear a lot of people say the beat. The beat is a big part of what people respond to when, it inspires dance, but it also inspires creative storytelling or singing. So someone has added that in hip hop, there is a story being told. There's a story being told, there's a vocal leader, and he uses rhyme and musical flow to deliver this message. I want to make sure I can see what's going on here on the chat as well. So, and let's see what else we got here. So, and how it makes you feel. It can bring joy and movement to your day. There's another piece that we have, and also the sound of the bass. Yes. Okay. So these are all important elements, and I think that it's good to also make the connection that we're looking at where the earliest inspirations for the types of beats and rhythms, that kind of driving sound or that metronomic pulse that we talk about, that really inspires dance or inspires a group movement. And when we do that, even if we're talking about hip hop music, we have to go back to West Africa to begin to look at what types of music were they making. So some of the elements of the music that was happening there incorporated such things as, in 5-tone scales, blue tonality, sort of the way we sing, sort of in between notes, a little bit different from what we hear or practice in classical music. So that idea of blue tonality, but also the beat in the group movement. So we look at West Africa for these things. Now, we have to start to look at, well, how did this even get here? How did it get to this part of the world? Well, we have to think about the transatlantic slave trade. So we have to look at what happened in the transatlantic slave trade in terms of such a large population of Africans being enslaved. Then say, okay, well, if they had drums and they played different kinds of music to express themselves and tell their stories, when they were brought on the slave ships, did they come with their musical instruments? Did they come with their drums? And the answer to that question is absolutely not. So this brings us to the first point that I want to talk about, which is the ring shout. And when I say ring, as in circle, ring, shout. Now, what a ring shout actually is it's a group movement, it's a musical movement, and it's a kind of community ritual where youth and elders are all together in a circle, in a movement, and a leader will help and facilitate a movement for the group. And each person will sing in some way or do some expression or dance or movement that the group can then respond to acknowledge that person. So essentially, if we were all in a room, the way the ring shout would work is we would be in a circle. However, since we'll do a virtual circle. So from where you are, what I'm going to ask you to do in this particular ring shout exercise, and we usually do a stomp and a clap kind of a movement. So we stomp and clap. So I'm just going to stop here and I'll clap like that. So like that. So if you just keep that pulse with me, boom. And then we sing a little bit and call and response. Me and my family, steady hip hopping, steady hip hopping. Me and my family, steady hip hopping. So you get the idea, and the movement would kind of go and move, and the energy would pick up, and people would dance. And it was one of the ways that they could get some relief as a community, getting away from the plantation life and being free and being expressive. So it was something that was meant to soothe them and also give them a supportive place to use their voices. Okay, good. Yes. So, and we're inviting you to all feel free to turn on your cameras if you'd like to participate and speak or talk about some of these topics that we're discussing. So that's the ring shout. Now, the ring shout is kind of the foundation here. But moving forward from that, during this time period where slavery is one of the chief institutions here in the country, is we have a music that really relates to that experience and kind of tells the story of it and gives you some insight to what the enslaved population was thinking and what they were doing. So we have a type of music known as the spirituals. So I would love to hear if anyone wanted to jump in and maybe talk about or throw it in the chat, something that you know or have heard about the spirituals in terms of a genre of music, the spirituals. So these were songs that were sung during times of slavery. Oh, and a very important point, they often carried hidden messages. So spirituals, let's talk about some examples of spirituals. An example might be, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, or maybe wade in the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. So those are some examples. Or even Go Down Moses. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. So, as you can hear from that, and even when I sung earlier, Oh Freedom, the central theme in the spirituals is the idea of freedom. And I love the way W.E.B. Du Bois, an African-American scholar, talks about the spirituals, or as he refers to them as sorrow songs even. But he just talks about how these songs show the value that Black people placed on freedom. He said, few ever worship freedom so rigorously as did the African American, as a leading example of what it would mean to be an American. So just to give you some ideas. So freedom is a central theme in the spirituals. We said they carried hidden messages. And again, these were songs that were sung while they worked. So we could also refer to them as kind of like work songs. And there are other conditions throughout time where we could see where music and music is one of the ways that people deal with having to work under duress or bondage. Expressing their desire for freedom, hidden messages. Also, just instilling a sense of hope. When you don't know when these conditions that challenge your humanity are going to change, and it doesn't seem to be any change in sight, one of the things that keeps you going is hope. So the spirituals really kind of offer some of that hope there. So I want to do a little activity. Let's do a little kind of a movement. If you're at your desk or at home or wherever you are, just going to imagine ourselves under the hot beating sun in Georgia, perhaps Albany, Georgia. That's deep south. And I know they furnished a lot of cotton in the Industrial Revolution. So I'm just going to do a little work here. Working in the fields. God's gonna trouble the water, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See that host all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. The leader looks like the Israelite. God's gonna trouble the water. In the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. So, spirituals, very foundational, important component in the musical developments that were happening here. And so after time had passed, eventually the whole question of slavery would come to a point where, well, one, I guess they were looking to end slavery, right? But then the country experienced a civil war. And after the Civil War, once slaves were declared free, or the enslaved population was declared free, it left a period of time known as Reconstruction in American history. So during this time of Reconstruction, the country is rebuilding. And during this time, African Americans are beginning to establish themselves in institutions. And one of the most basic and important central institutions that we did have in the community coming out of slavery would have been the church. And it was through the churches that businesses and community networks were formed. And with some help and movement, sure, then we started to see Black educational institutions. And alongside this movement was a musical movement that also expressed gratitude for having come out of such a dark passage in our history. And we have, for that, gospel music. So I love to talk about gospel music and its role in coming out of this Reconstruction period, because one, it shows an energy and an inspiration bubbling coming out of the Black experience here. Lots of hope and optimism. So what do we know about gospel music? Gospel music. Well, one, let's talk about the term and where it comes from, what it actually means. So the word gospel, gospel, actually means good news. It comes from the Greek. So the music has helped people to get through difficult times. Yes. On and on and on and over, we see that being a theme. And that's one of the reasons why we're here having this discussion. So gospel music, good news. In church traditions, we have a way of sharing or talking about overcoming struggles or learning in life, and we call those testimonies. So, and oftentimes when gospel is presented, it's presented as a form of a testimony or a story of someone having overcome some challenges. And so in a way, gospel is the testimony of African Americans being here. And so interesting things. I just want to check out some of what folks are saying here. Many artists often have their singing careers through church. And that's a beautiful connection too. And I live here in Philly, so I get to see that firsthand, and went from my hometown where I'm from, Newark, New Jersey, that really the church creates some of the most awesome and amazing musicians, both vocally and instrumentally. Certainly, it's an amazing training ground, and it has been historically for a long time. So therefore, and thereafter, and their strong, beautiful harmony. So again, the gospel music is very much a community music. It's one where youth and elders alike come together and they can sing together and dance and move together and express themselves. So I'd like to do something with gospel music in the spirit of that connection there. And we'll keep it something like that we all basically know. So we're gonna do a scene of a traditional Black African American church, and in the scene I'll play the church musician and the pastor, and I'm gonna ask you all to play the roles of the congregation and our wonderful gospel choir. So even though you're not here in the studio, I'm gonna hear you singing and call and response. So here we go. Good morning, brethren. Welcome to the Church of Hip-Hop Jazz Musicology, where you come to learn about your culture and your music. I feel so blessed to be here today. Brethren, I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, you are blessed. Woo! Now, brethren, I want you to turn to your other neighbor. Say, other neighbor, you are blessed. Yeah. Now, brethren, at this time, we will have a selection from our wonderful gospel choir. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All in my home, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, all in my home, I'm gonna let it shine. All in my home, I'm gonna let it shine. Gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. You know. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine. Everybody, let it shine. Woo. All right. So, other interesting points about gospel music that I like to point out. Now, gospel music is a music that's connected to a religious experience that's a part of the community. Hip hop, on the other hand, is a form of popular music or community music and a movement that isn't directly associated with a religious experience. However, a lot of the hip hop artists do have some strong spiritual background or leadership role that they play in the community. But interestingly enough, if we look at some of the parallels in gospel music in the context and in hip hop, we're going to find some strong similarities. So one, both are generally led by a strong vocal leader. So at the hip hop party, you have the MC, right? That person who brings a positive message and comes to the group saying, hey, throw your hands in the air and wave them like you just don't care, right? And, brings you into a space where you can be free and be part of a group movement. Similarly, we have a strong vocal leader in the church context, a pastor who teaches through an art of call and response using a positive message from biblical scripture. So, two strong vocal leaders. Similarly, in hip hop, who supports the strong vocal leader? We have what they call the hype man, right? That other MC who brings the extra energy and shows the audience how to participate, how to get involved, and how to do it right, to be all in sync. And similarly, if you go to a church, usually the elders or the deacons will show you or lead you in a way to help you participate to get the most out of that experience. Similarly, there's a musical underscore that creates the inviting atmosphere for the hip hop party, and that's provided by the DJ. Now in church, what we have is a band and a choir, or essentially a choir. So the choir provides that warm, welcoming space to invite the community in through soothing voices and music, but then they also support the role of the pastor being that strong vocal leader. So this is interesting. These are some basic parallels between hip hop and gospel. So religious, secular, but still certain elements that bring the community together in a certain way. I want to push the discussion forward a little bit more. So now we've celebrated having overcome some challenges, pushing through Reconstruction with resistance and what have you. And I think we're also realizing that a lot of our challenges didn't exactly go away. Some of them resurfaced in different ways. And we needed a music to speak about that. And that's where we get the blues. So I want to talk about the blues. And essentially, blues, the way I see the blues is it's one of the most important and influential types of music to come out from American soil and really reach out to the world. So when we're looking at blues, we're talking about generally a kind of a sad song with a slow beat, and different from gospel music, although it does use some similar improvisational. There's also the testimony aspect. Blues is similar in that regard too. But there's storytelling, and you don't necessarily have to have a pretty voice or sound a certain way as a singer, because with the blues, it's really more about the individual story and how people connect and relate. So the blues really opens up the individual voice. And that's what hip hop is all about, the individual, his unique voice. So that also is in the tradition through blues. So another thing I want to talk about with the blues, so when we talk about the blues, the term has several different connotations. So one, I think back in the day, they would call them blue demons, blue devils. And that's just a way of saying you're depressed or you have rough feelings, you're going through a hard time. So the blues expresses that. Now, the blues also is a form in music that we refer to, and if you do jazz or do rock or R&B or certain types of music, we have what we call blues chord changes. 1, 4, and 5. So there's a blues form, but then there's also blue notes. So you get that. So now I want to do a little something with the blues, but this is where we really need your input. I'm going to ask you, so if you could put something in the chat window about something that makes you blue. So generally when we do this, we'll have students and teachers come up next to each other and offer some topics on something that makes you blue, and do a little improvisational storytelling around it. So we got anything coming in there? Something that makes you blue? All right, like losing a loved one. Again, any more topics? That's one. I'm just gonna riff until I see a few more topics appear. All right, we got 3 now. I remember the day you went away. It broke my heart. It broke my heart. I remember the day that was topic 1. Now topic 2 is a different kind of blues. We call these, I guess you might say, are places when a person has 2 faces and they aren't who they say they are. Whoa, whoa, who are you? All right, here we go. I don't mean to be mean, but I'm just so frustrated with this whole quarantine. Can't go out to play, oh, nothing to do. So I'm here locked down with these quarantine blues. Oh, oh, Now the next topic here is so much rambunctious. We talking about war and all this destruction. Why we fighting for? What we doing it for? We don't need your war. Thank you for the topics. So yeah, I just want to kind of get into the spirit of how blues is a very much an improvisational art. And part of the reason that it works, and you could get together and actually play a blues with someone who you've never met, is because of the form and the language. The language has become somewhat of a universal language to work with. And really, like I said, we see where blues has given us R&B, rhythm and blues. We see where blues has furnished a sound or a backdrop for gospel music. We see where blues has come together with various folk musics here to create a country blues. We see where blues has given inspiration to a whole movement in rock and roll. And what's the difference between blues and rock and roll anyway? And is rock and roll and rhythm and blues not really the same when we think about what the terms mean? So we can take this old rural blues pattern here, for instance, right? Now, go into the future, maybe 40 years, go visit Chuck Berry. So you see, it's not really a big leap between blues and rock and roll. And blues is ever present. So we still hear it today in a lot of the popular music that's being created. And blues is a perfect segue for us to go into speaking about jazz music. So I want to touch on jazz, and there's some key and important points to look at. So one, jazz continues to extend that improvisational spirit that is coming out of blues and coming out of gospel. It's important to look at some of the other influences on jazz. So there's a higher level of musicianship, and we have to look at what are the historical contexts? What is the historical context that this is coming from? So one, we have to go to New Orleans. Now, New Orleans is a place where certain elements all came together at a certain time to really push this movement forward. So one, we had a lot of classically trained musicians, pianists, horn players, different musicians, drummers, all in New Orleans. We had a Creole culture, a rich Creole culture, where there was a tradition of when a person would pass away, we just did a blues about that, but when a person would pass away, they would have a type of celebratory funeral march. So a lot of times different musicians in the community would come together and collectively improvise and play together to send someone off in a good way. So all of these elements happening. Ragtime music, right? Piano. So we had all these elements coming together. And then this thing happened. A man named Louis Armstrong, born in New Orleans, and got a hold of a trumpet at an early age. And he is essentially a central figure for pushing jazz into the mainstream in a creative space. And some of the things that he contributed are just a structural way to place a solo into a group improvisation. So the group supports the soloist. And he has such a strong voice, both vocally and the trumpet. So we're going to look at another thing that he's contributed to the culture of music, and that's the whole concept of the scat. Not saying that scatting wasn't happening before, but the way he implemented it in jazz music really gave us a powerful way to connect the human voice with various instruments, from horns and so forth. So Louis Armstrong. We can go further and look at some of the other developments and some of the other musical contributions. So we can look at Duke Ellington. We can look at Count Basie, Benny Goodman, the big bands. The big bands, one, brought us into what we would call the swing era. Now, swing is the key term here, a key term, essential term in jazz. And swing means several things, like blues. So one, swing refers to a rhythm, a sense of rhythm or timing. We call them swinging eighth notes. But that swing feeling. So it's a feeling of playing ahead of or behind a beat, a push and pull or expressiveness in your delivery. Swing. Swing also describes a type of dance. Obviously, if there's a rhythm, there's a dance or types of dances that can accompany the rhythm. So swing describes an era. I'm talking about 20s, 30s, during that Harlem Renaissance time where jazz is bursting out and really, making an impact and giving us many, many great musicians and voices. I mean, I can go from Ella Fitzgerald, Miles Davis, John Coltrane. And Philly has many, 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 many amazing jazz musicians, even to date, that are all part of this legacy and this movement. So we should do something on hands-on with jazz. Yes, indeed. Let's see here. Raindrops on roses and biscuits on paper, bright copper kettles and warm wooden kittens, brown paper packages high up in strings. These are a few of my favorite things: green colored ponies and crisp apple strudels, doorbells, sleigh bells, schnitzel and noodles, wild geese that fly with the moon on their wings. These are a few of my favorite things. When the dog bites and the bee stings and I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so sad. Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes, snowflakes that stay on my nose and eyelashes, silver white winters that melt into spring. These are a few of my favorite things. These are a few of my favorite things. So, yeah, it's a good conversation to talk about jazz. And jazz is very much a connector of all types of music, all the elements, all the voices. It's a huge, vast world. And within the world of jazz, we have a world of blues. So we have blues in a certain blues category, but then there's blues within jazz. So in some ways, it's similar, but it's not exactly the same. So these are just, and you'll notice that when you listen to different music, but it's interesting sometimes when you listen to jazz, what we would call a blues, a lot of songs, and what they're referring to again is more so the structure of the piece. Yes, and Miles Davis again. So Miles Davis is almost like that central nerve through the legacy. Louis Armstrong and Miles Davis, because he connects everyone. So we can go back to the Duke Ellingtons and so forth. And Miles was a young guy there. He played with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, came through the ranks, and then began to mentor so many musicians. One who we lost recently, Chick Corea. Amazing musicians have come through that camp. And that just goes to show you how strong a sense of community within the jazz movement is. And again, this is an American music. Perfect segue. We have a few minutes left, and I want to close out talking about hip hop. So let's look at the context now. We're at a time where gang violence is at a high. Economic hardship is really starting to show its face, and as it had been in the past. But we're at a point, we're talking about like the 70s, the late 70s, going into the 80s. But so interestingly enough, hip hop grew as out of a way to, I think, one, work against the violence and also create a form of therapy and a sense of community under harsh conditions. So we look at the principles of hip hop and where they came from. So one interesting figure among many, well, one, we should look at Cool DJ Herc, who's an innovator, has a background, his family's background is from Jamaica. And so a key component, and someone mentioned earlier, like the bass, the presence of the bass. Interestingly enough, a tradition in Jamaica, in the dance halls, they would have DJs play records or rhythms, they would call them. And a rhythm would be a standard of a song or another song with a, it's a boom, 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 boom. You hear this rhythm a lot, and different people sing, or what they call toast to it. They improvise, they freestyle, they speak to the audience. So DJ Kool Herc brings in this sort of Jamaican stylized sound, that booming system, and he set his turntables up in the projects for people to enjoy. So that inspiration gave energy to a lot of different movements that would come out of hip hop. So we have both principles and then we have elements. Here's the rundown of the elements. And I like to always express that they're all active verbs. So if you rhyme and lead the audience, that's called emceeing, okay? If you dance, breakdancing. If you do graffiti art, that's called graffiti writing. If you do turntablism, that's called DJing, right? If you make music with your mouth, that's called beatboxing, which is also similar to a jazz element we talked about earlier, scatting. So right, but then we have the principles of hip hop, and this is where we'll close out today. Peace, love, unity, and having fun. And there's even a song, funny enough, with Africa Bambaataa and James Brown, the very title. And one of my favorite MCs that I enjoy and have kind of put myself through school by is KRS-One, who is a great MC, and in his early days, he was a graffiti writer. And in fact, the interesting thing about a lot of MCs is their name oftentimes is part of the person that they want to become. So Tex Rich Ali. So in KRS-One's case, K, knowledge, R, reigns, S, supreme, 1, over, N, nearly, E, everybody. Knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everybody. Knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everyone. And while many rappers were pursuing other identities to be kings or to be the best dressed or the richest, his humble role as an MC was to be the best teacher he could be. So other MCs, the Guru, gifted, unlimited, rhymes universal. So these are MCs bringing together these elements of hip hop culture. So I would love to close out with a little, and I'll do the call and response with you. I know you're there with me. So we're gonna do when I say peace, you say peace. When I say love, you say love, unity. So I say peace, you say love. There you go. I say peace, you say love. I say unity, you say and having fun. So peace, love, unity, and having fun. Peace, love, unity, and having fun. Peace, love, unity, and having fun. Thanks for joining me. 233. I'm Tech Rich Ali. This is Hip Hop Jazz Musicology. Pick it. I'm gonna rock it. This is how I do it when I beatbox it. Beatbox it. I'm stomping on the box. I'm strumming on the axe. You know that I rock. You know that I rock. I kick it, yo, really. I like to do this every day from West Philly, or anywhere in the world. You can catch me teaching the boys and girls, bringing the family together, rocking too. Cause this is what I do, cause I'm universal too. 1, 2, 3, the MC is Tex Rich Ali, and I'm a rocker cause you know I got to, and this is what I love to do. I say peace, love, unity, and having fun. So, wow, it's been fun presenting to you all. I'm totally open to answering any questions if we have a brief moment for that. And after that, I want to pass it back off to our museum staff. But I'm here now, and I would love to hear from you all. Any questions or just any feedback that you want to share with you. And thank you all so much for just being here and for the wonderful feedback. Thank you. Thank you. So, Ihaku has a question?
Yes. It's actually not a question. It's just feedback. Just to say that was so educational, so inspiring. Love to see you in your element. You can see that the passion, and it just was very contagious. So thank you for taking the time and for teaching us. Really appreciate it. It was amazing.
Thank you. And this compliment is coming from a bandmate that we had a band in Philly for some years. So that's wonderful feedback with someone whom I've shared the stage with.
I just wanted to say thank you. It was truly very enjoyable. And also I was wondering, who are some, you mentioned some artist names, but if you wanted, people to be, check out some new music and whatnot, do you have anybody that you're listening to right now that you're super into, old or new?
Yeah.
And that, just spread that love.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I just subscribed, and I've held out for a long time. I just subscribed to the YouTube Premium. So it's like easier to listen to albums. So I don't know. One I've been listening to, I kind of walk out when I go do a morning walk, Busta Rhymes. Again, he's always been one of my favorites. Very like enthusiastic, energetic MC. But in terms of new people that I'm listening to now that's really blowing my mind, there's a jazz musician named Kamasi Washington. And I believe he's from the West Coast. He's a horn player, and it's just, he's prolific, and it just it makes me happy to know that people are still doing jazz, spiritual music like Coltrane or like Alex Coltrane, and in that tradition. So that's one. And I'm still listening to a lot of my old ones and my favorites. I'm pulling back up, old Lenny Kravitz records. Just, I don't know, things like that. But yeah, no, I am. And I'm also just trying to also tap into some of the new artists that other people are listening to kind of discern what's good there.
Yeah,
so,
thank
you.
Yeah,
sure thing.
I don't want to jump over anybody else's question, but I do just want to say that Busta Rhymes did a song very recently with Stevie Wonder and Chica and a bunch of other people. So good. So
yeah. Stevie Wonder is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix, Bob Marley, KRS-One, and I like rock too, so I like Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. He's one of my favorite songwriters. Citizen Cope.
Excellent, very good. Love talking music. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ali, for a great workshop. And thank you for everyone for your participation. I thank you for again for joining us, and I wish you all a great day. Thank you again, Ali.
Thank you all. Have a blessed day as well.